Hello and welcome to the I3 lecture series hosted by the Masters in Digital Photography here at the School of Visual Arts. I am Julie Graham. I hope everyone's summer was satisfactory. I'm happy to see familiar faces. I'm happy to say a hearty hello to new faces and give an especially warm welcome to the students. I hope that you will find my speakers stimulating and we look forward to your questions later. We are kicking off with an old friend and colleague of mine, Eric McNatt. Eric is known for his music and celebrity portraits. He has shot extensively for the editorial world, working for magazines including the New York Times Style Mag, New York Magazine, Vogue, Fortune, Wired, Interview, Paper, Spin, and People. His commercial clients include A&E Entertainment, the History Channel, Sony Records, and NBC USA. Eric's work is in the collections of the Museum of the City of New York and the New York World Trade Memorial, and his work is currently on view at Benrubi Gallery here in New York as part of their exhibition Gorgeousness, A Summer Pride. Eric is an educator and advocate. He teaches photography at FIT and is actively involved with social and political non-profit organizations. Let's give it up for Eric.
Hello. Thank you very much, Julie. And yes, we've known each other for quite a while. I'd like to say thank you for everyone for coming out tonight, and especially seeing all of my friends in the audience makes me feel a little overwhelmed. But I know that there are a lot of things going on in this city, so thank you for being here tonight. So my name is Eric McNatt, and I have been in New York City since 1996. And I'm going to do something that I have never done before and try to talk a little bit about my work as an artist and as a photographer as the arc of my life, and not necessarily talk about just random projects that I've worked on, but more about how the work is influenced by the life that I'm living, and also how the work kind of changed my life. And I want to start at the very beginning and show you where I started, how I got to where I am, and show you the pits and the downfalls and the highs and the lows and the whole bit. So I've never really talked about some of the stuff here tonight, so I am a little bit nervous, but hopefully you'll stick with me. So I am from Austin, Texas. And I kind of lived all over the place when I was younger because I was raised by a single mom and shipped kind of back and forth between my father and my mother. My mother did all the raising of me. As you can see, this is me at 14, and I was a little bit of a terror. And this is my catch-a-goo-goo phase. I was a very gay and queer child. My mom told me she knew I was gay when I was 2. And she told me that she knew because I was dancing in the back of the car to Gypsy, Tramps and Thieves by Cher. So my mother protected me from the state of Texas. She worked for the Texas educational system. And she really fiercely protected me from bullies and from living in a situation where I was under fear, almost to the point where she was overly protective and made sure I was getting in safe spaces all the time. And she was like making sure I was in art classes, and I couldn't go to PE because I was going to get bullied. So I have to thank my mother for this time because she really watched over me. Because we were she was a single mom and we didn't necessarily come from means, I started working really young at the age of 14. My first job was a Piggly Wiggly bagging groceries. And my second job was working in the kitchen of a place called the Waterloo Ice House in Austin. And that's where all the punk rock kids worked, in the kitchen of the Waterloo Ice House, flipping burgers and making baked potatoes for all the music people that came into the Waterloo Ice House. So I had an education from a very cool group of people. This is something I was doing. I think I was like 16 at this point. And I went to kind of an arts educational school for a particular kind of program that I had to show a portfolio to get in. So everyone in my world were kind of like art fags and freaks, and it was always that way in Austin. And Austin was different than the rest of the state of Texas because it's a progressive city, and it's a liberal city because the University of Texas is there. So I worked at the Waterloo Ice House, but I also worked on the weekends at another place called Magnolia Cafe in Austin, and I was the weekend busboy. And this place, this Magnolia Cafe, this was before the internet or anything. It was the place that everyone came after the bands got out and after the clubs got out. So I was 16 and 17 years old, waiting on very famous rock musicians and just hearing incredible stories and living a life that I thought was just unbelievable at the age of 17. Knowing this, I didn't really know where I wanted to go. I know I needed to go to art school. I know I needed to get out of Texas. In fact, I will go back to my mother and say there was a time when she actually showed up at my high school, and my career counselor was shocked when she walked in the door, and she goes, "I don't care where he goes, just get him the fuck out of Texas." And that's kind of where we started. All I really knew about this time is working at Magnolia and meeting these cool people and these people in my life, they kept telling me about this school in San Francisco. And I didn't really know that much about it, but I kept hearing that, it's like the last vestibule of like a real art and drawing and painting. And so I, at the age of 18, packed up my bags and left Austin. I sold my car and all my belongings and moved to San Francisco, and I was not ready for what I walked into. So I was just kind of like a dumb gay hick, basically, walking into the San Francisco Art Institute. And I suddenly was surrounded by real artists that had been brought up and raised in an arts environment, people that had gone to Cooper Union and Stuyvesant and all these places I had never heard of, St. Anne's, St. Edward's, Friends. These are just like a whole new world for me. And I also was out-of-state tuition, so I was paying a lot of money to be there in this institution. It was an incredible experience. The campus in this building is gorgeous, if you've ever seen it. It was shut down for the last 5 years, but recently Bill Gates' ex-wife just bought it, and she's turning it back into an arts school. And she saved the Diego Rivera mural that's inside the facility, which was a big deal for me. But this was like, I can't even explain to you how it was like a different world walking in and walking into studios and paintings and just art around me all the place. And I loved it. It was an amazing space. I saw Annie Leibovitz talk. I saw all these amazing things happen at that campus. And I did walk away that semester with some good friends. But I knew it wasn't for me. And I also knew that I couldn't afford to stay there. So I didn't last longer than 1 month. And I ended up going and taking my core classes at San Francisco State University. And I met some really incredible teachers at the state level at San Francisco State. And one of the places they kept talking about was a school that I had never heard of, no one had ever heard of, and that was a school that was on the other side of the bay called CCAC. And I didn't know what this was. At the time, it was still a small, affordable little arts college. It wasn't the juggernaut that it is now called CCA, California College of the Arts. But at the time, you had Berkeley on one end of College Avenue, and then you had CCAC at the other end. And when you walked in, it was a giant wall and this arc, and it was like a fairyland exploded in Hobbitown. It was just like little shacks and pathways and buildings and trees everywhere. It was phenomenal, and I knew at that moment that I was home. So I did everything I could to get into the college. And I didn't know who was teaching there, what it was about, but I knew I needed to be in this place. So when you're lucky, I feel like, when you have a teacher that changes your life and influences you and changes the course and direction. And this is what this person was to me, Chris Johnson. And it was the first time I walked into a class where I was profoundly moved by the criticism and the things that he said about the work and the art. And be it I didn't know anything about him, but I kind of was like, wow, I really need to listen to what he's saying. And I stayed in his class, and because of him, I took photo one. And at this point, I was a painter and a drawer. I came in as a drawing major. And I decided to take photo one with Chris Johnson because I really loved him so much. And these pictures come from high school. And the first day of class in photo one, and I teach photo one now, so I kind of know these things, and I actually stole a lot of his ideas for the class. But the first day of class, he comes in with this huge thing of books, and he throws it down, you know, and it's your typical photo books of the time. And he asked each person to bring in work, and so he could look at it. And I showed him these slides. And he goes, you know, you're just drawing famous photographs, right? I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, you're just drawing pictures out of Life magazine. And it was an earth-shattering moment for me when I realized that photography was an art medium of itself, and that I had been drawing and copying something that was already a masterpiece of its own. And I had an affinity for Irving Penn. So the moment I kind of had that realization that I had been just like, been using curated, photo-edited images, right, from Life magazine, everything kind of changed for me. And the way that I work is I go head first into things. So I did a little painting, a little using alternative processing and some drawing. But the truth is, I was really into the photographs and the photographs. And part of my photo one class and when you enter art school is to create a journal. And we do this still to this day. And I was so excited to go home and use all my scrap images and create a journal for all the people in my class. And I showed back up, and I wasn't prepared for what happened because it ends up that I was making everyone cry, including my professor, with the book that I had. And it wasn't until that moment that I realized that I had maybe had a little bit of different life than everyone in the room. And what I had done was create a book of ex-lovers and people that had died of AIDS. And within a period of, say, age 17 to 22, I lost my boyfriend from high school. I lost my roommate. I lost really important lovers. And more importantly, I lost two of the biggest mentors of my life. And so I was walking into this classroom realizing at that point that my life was a little different, right? That I had survived a plague, and these people had not been touched by that. In this photograph, in this book, is a letter of my partner at the time, who was about 6 years older than me, telling me that he was HIV positive in 1989. I was 17 years old. So I guess I went through a lot of deep thinking at that time about what I had lived through and my experiences of the time. But more importantly, I kind of like dove into photography as an art form. This is my first sensitive gay boy photo picture with long hair. And I was so like driven that I was like, I'm gonna go find the photo galleries in town. So I went to the I Gallery and I just marched in there. I was like, I want a job, I want to work here. And they did, and I had these incredible experiences where I was hanging Sally Mann shows at the age of 21, you know. And at that time, I met the assistant curator that was working there, and she moved over to another gallery, and I went with her, and I worked there as a weekend attendant. So I was learning the gallery, the photo industry from the gallery perspective when I was like in my early 20s. At the same time, I started shooting baseball and little leagues on the weekends to pay the rent. And I was working 2 different jobs and going to school full time to make it work. Now, back then, CCAC wasn't $24,000 a semester, right? It was like an affordable college. And because I was considered a state resident at that point, I qualified for Cal grants and Pell grants and all these things that were available to me, and I took advantage of it if I kept my grade point average above a certain level. And that's what how I survived. It was about this time in 93, 94, when I started getting overwhelmed and really digging into the photo world and the things that really inspired me. And I can't talk about how much Nan Goldin's Ballad of Sexual Dependency meant to me when it came out. Because I remember walking down the street on Market and seeing that book for the first time and just being like, what the fuck is that? You know, and it was a big deal when it came out. And I also learned about the work of Carrie Mae Weems, Catherine Opie, and this is a photograph of Vivian, Justin Vivian Bond, and Viv and I ended up having a friendship that's lasted to this day, and we're going to see some more work later on. So one of the big stars of CCAC back then was Larry Sultan, and I got into his thesis senior class, and I was very excited about being awarded that spot in his room. But at the same time, Larry was working on the Valley, the porn industry behind the scenes, and he never showed up to class. Instead, it was the TA, Harold Fletcher, who I love Harold a lot, but we did not get along. And on the 5th class, I walked out, went straight to the registrar's office and dropped the class. And was it a mistake? Probably. Was it one of the bigger mistakes I've made? Probably. But it happened, and I did go to another class, and I did learn a lot from the other teachers and the students in that class, but I'll never forget when I walked out of Larry Sultan's class, because everyone's like, "You're walking out of Larry's class? How dare you?" And I was like, well, if he showed up, I would, come. So, and about that time, I stumbled upon the work of Peter Hujar, and back then he only had one book. When I saw it, I was just like, what is this? And I think I spent the next 20 years of my life chasing and making work that looked like Peter Hujar's. So this is some of the work I was doing in school, and I have lots of this stuff that's fun and it's, stuff, but you can kind of see where the inspiration was coming from. This was a project I did for my thesis project on immigration. And this is, I keep this in here because this is my best friend, Miguel. We moved to New York together, and that's going to come in later. So in the summer of '93, I got offered an internship at the original Out magazine here in New York. And I took it. I waited tables at Life Cafe in the East Village. And I had 3 days of internships at Out magazine when it used to be down in Soho. And I really learned the magazine world, and I learned that that was where I wanted to be, right? So after that summer was over, I went back to school, I finished my degree, and I had to make a really hard decision. I had everything ready, I had letters of recommendation for grad school, and I made a decision that I needed to work. And I wanted to assist, and I wanted to get out there and learn. And I fought my way tooth and nail to get into Flat Top Studios. And Flat Top was this giant warehouse where Macy's and JCPenney's and all these different companies came through and you did product shots. So I was loading like 200 4x5 cases, chrome, every day for a couple of years. And for those that can remember, we were in this giant warehouse shooting like Macy room scenarios, and we had those old Speedotron packs, and we had to do like 20 pops to get the F-64, right? So that was kind of where I learned how to be a photographer there. It really was my graduate school. I learned how to take pictures and how to expose pictures and how to work chrome and lighting and strobes and all this stuff. But once I felt ready, I was ready to go. A situation happened. It's a whole nother story on itself, but it was time to move to New York. I got an offer, and I moved to New York in 1996, and I hit the ground running. From 1996 to 2000, I worked nonstop and traveled the world, and I worked for over 50 to 60 different photographers in New York. Some of them amazing, top tier, and some of them low ring, low rung, amazing. But I learned from all of them. And what this is the Polaroids of me standing in as an assistant for the lighting. And I kept all these Polaroids when the photographer would let me have them. And I'm so grateful that I had this. But you know, you get to see young Eric sticking his head out of a cooler and stuff like that. But I did this for 4 years. And all this time, though, when I was working, I was also actually building a small body of work with my little Yashica and my land camera. And one thing that I had learned from Peter Hujar is to keep that journal, keep that diary, and I kept it going. And I photographed my friends, my lovers, and all I had was my little Yashica and my land camera. And I shot the hell out of everything and everyone. About in 1998, I ended up working for a photographer who changed my life again. And her name was Dana Gallagher. And after the first time I worked with her, I went up to her and said, I need to work with you. And I learned how to be a pro photographer with Dana. She showed me how to dance around clients, how to be a creative force, how to fight for your own creative vision, how to work with high-end, high-profile clients with a smile on your face and still get things done. She was tenacious. She was amazing. I learned how to be a pro with Dana. During this time of working as an assistant, I saved enough money to buy a Mamiya 6.7, and I put it to use and started photographing all my friends. This is actually a land camera shot. But I kept it going, and I kept photographing all my friends, and I'm so grateful I have all these images. And you get the pictures like this, and you go, wow, there's Peter Hujar again. And when I talked about Out Magazine and being here, this was my boss, A.L. Steiner. And Steiner was instrumental in my life coming to New York and getting me landed and happy. And Steiner now runs the program at Yale, for those that don't know. And this is Eve Fowler, who also is an amazing photographer. She became a friend of mine, and we worked together for a period of time. And this was her at her old West Village space. It was on Bleecker, right near you. In 2000, I started getting smaller jobs, and I had reached a point as an assistant where I couldn't go any further. You kind of burn out. And Dana was gracious enough to give my name to an editor that worked at Time Out, and I started doing smaller projects for them, and that led to my first cover for them in 1999. I was still assisting. I was still assisting my ass off, but I got this cover. And from that cover, things kind of spiraled. So the other side of this is I was also working for a small little magazine called Visionaire. And Visionaire was an arts fashion publication that started in James Kalodaros' living room, moved to Varick Street. And I used to shoot the products for them, the books themselves, on white. It was never in the wildest dreams that I would know that the creative director of Visionaire would go on to become the creative director of Harper's Bazaar, one of the biggest fashion magazines in the world. And I ended up working for Harper's Bazaar for a couple of years. And once again, I'm stealing directly from Irving Penn, from those that can tell. So I shot for Life, different types of lifestyle magazines, Elle Decor. I shot for most girly magazines, Self, Child. There was a period of time where I was working a lot. And in this year, in year 2000, I was contacted by the editors, and there was this new magazine, and it was called O by Oprah Magazine. And I was one of the first crew that came in and was working with Oprah. And I worked for them for about 1.5 years until this. So, you know, there's going to be times in your life and in your career where you make really big mistakes. And you'll take them to your grave. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. but this is a case where this was the last shoot of the day with Oprah. And Oprah is well known for, and by the way, this has been 22 years, so I can talk about this. But she controlled the shoot, and if she said the shoot was over, the shoot was over. And I had intentionally shot 220 film to make sure I had more film in the camera, yada, yada. And on the third 3 frames out, she goes, okay, you got it. And I was like, all right, I've got 3 frames left. She's like, you got it. I was there, you got it. And I was like, okay. So I turned to my assistant and went forwarded and advanced the camera. And I turned back around to Oprah's look at me that I will never forget. And I never worked for O Magazine again. And you have to ask why. Well, she didn't really know me, right? And I basically just betrayed her trust. Even though she owned the copyright in all these images, I had just taken a photograph of her, 3 frames, without her consent. And that was enough. And I never worked for O Magazine again. I was devastated. I called the editor. I tried to figure out, I was going to write a letter, and they're like, don't bother. So this was my first copyright infringement, and this happened with Newsweek, and I was walking down the street, and suddenly my image was a giant bus stop all over the city. So I called the editor, and I went in, and she was like, oh, there's a big mistake, yada, yada, yada. And I said, sure. And she said, we settled on a price. I went home, and then the lawyers started calling, and they kept chiseling me down, chiseling me down. And I was like, you know what? I learned a valuable lesson over here. I really want to work for Newsweek again, and I'll take whatever you guys want to pay me. I understand the situation. I just want to make sure that I do right by you. They still never hired me again. So at the same time, as a punk rock artist kid, like we're all reading Interview, and that was the magazine we all wanted to work for. Paper and Interview. They didn't pay anything, but you got to be an interview. You got to shoot in paper. And I was tenacious about trying to figure out a way to get in there. And it ends up that it was easier than I thought because I became friends with somebody that worked there. And I showed my work, and I ended up working for them. I was one of the lucky few that Ingrid liked. At that same time, 2001, September 11th happened, and I was on a plane for a month and a half with my assistant traveling around the country after September the 11th, shooting this story, thinking that I was going to die. But one of the things that I want to bring up in this story is that people don't understand, like after September the 11th, we were all shooting film, lots of film, and all the security people wanted you to put the film through the X-ray machine. So we would go through these big jobs, and I'd be shooting kind of like well-known portraits and celebrities, and my assistant Cy would literally get into fights with the security people. And there was 2 times we almost got thrown in jail, but he always got them to do the individual swipe, right? But at one time we ended up having to go get lead bags to put all the film through, and we'd end up sending the stuff through in the lead bags anyway, but on the other end they'd have to swipe it one by one. But they'd be like, no, you have to send it through. And they'd be like, no, I don't. Here's the rules that say that I don't have to do that. Anyway, that's something you don't have to think about, but back then it was a big deal trying to get your film through the X-ray machine. So I started getting work that I liked. My style kind of started jumping around, changing a little bit. And music is the soul of me. I grew up in Austin. I grew up sneaking out to clubs and going to see bands, and it was a very important thing for me. And I started getting phone calls from Flaunt magazine, from the music editor to shoot. And these are 2 of my favorites, is a Stereo Lab, and I got to meet and photograph Ecstasy. And I don't think a lot of people know who Ecstasy is, but I tell you, this photograph got me so much work from different people in the music industry that would see that and be like, wow, you photographed Ecstasy? So about this time, I had already been shooting some stuff for paper, and ended up getting shooting Peaches for her first album that came to the Teachers of Peaches. And we shot these in my friend Dave Hickey's apartment in the East Village on Avenue D. We ended up photographing her twice. These are examples of the types of work that I was doing for paper back then. I'm currently pulling this stuff out right now and re-examining it and trying to figure out how I can make something with it, because it was a lot of work. So go back to here where this is Kiki and Herb. Vivian, who I showed you a photograph from like the early 90s. She's now a performance artist, being very successful. It was right before her Carnegie Hall show. And Paper Magazine called me, and I thought, oh God, that's really funny because you're asking me to photograph two of my friends. And then this is Rufus. And this is how the magazine came out with Rufus, which I wasn't too keen about. And then I started working for New York Magazine. They used to do these polls on the street, and they were big productions. We had seamlesses and 2 assistants and producers and people running around asking questions. They don't do this anymore, but I did this for at least a year on the street. We did it at Madonna's concert. We did it at different election periods. Every time they would have a different idea, I would go out and shoot this. This is Melvin Van Peebles. Lucky to get to spend time with him. So I want to put this picture in here because this is Pat Fields, and I love this picture so much. And Pat Fields, this story I have to tell you. So this is her blue Pacer, and she picked me up, and we went over to the West Side Highway, and this was before the West Side Highway had been built out, so it was just all like open. So we were like driving out on the piers, you know, taking pictures. And she tells me the story how she put the car in a parking garage and forgot she had it in the 1970s. And it wasn't until like the late 80s, early 90s, she was like, oh, I think I have a car. And I love that story because like it shows you how different the world, New York City was. In 2013, there's a very big story with this, but I don't want to get too involved with it, but tell you that Meg and Jack of the White Stripes fought for me to have this cover. And the PR company fought for me to have this cover. Interview and Ingrid didn't want me to have this cover, but Meg and Jack fought for it. I'll always be grateful for that. Elliott Smith. And then I started getting larger magazines like Esquire and GQ, photographing different portraits. This was actually for a magazine called Filter Magazine, and then Merge Records decided they wanted to buy it, and then Retina stepped in, and Julie and Kelly here got me these 2 covers, one with Time and one with Rolling Stone with Adam Green and the Moldy Peaches. Retina used to syndicate my work. I did album packaging a lot for different bands, and then the TV network started calling. This was my first ad job. During this whole time, I still made books of Polaroids throughout my entire career. And I have maybe 4 or 5 of these, and I'm so grateful that I have records of all of it, right? And sometimes I wrote down the dates, sometimes I didn't, but I have proof that I had this life right here in these books. So I kept doing it. And so I would do a lot of these band jobs for different labels, and they were usually work for hire contracts. So the negatives and the contacts went away, and I never saw them again. And this was all I'd be left with. And this was newfound glory. But there were several of them. But you've got to also remember, these things didn't pay my rent. Interview and Paper were paying me $50, maybe $100. What was paying my rent was Cosmopolitan magazine, shooting front of book, lifestyle images. And this happened because the creative director saw my work at Out and called me and said, would you be interested in doing these types of front of book illustrated photographs? And I was like, yeah. This paid the rent and the mortgage and the car. I could make a book out of guys without a shirt pictures. I probably should. In one of these books is a picture of me recreating this picture. And then I got to work with the Blue Man Group. Lighting this was very difficult, by the way, and it was a challenging. I was very grateful to have that time with them. In 2008, I was asked to pitch an idea to Aperture, and a bunch of photographers put in ideas, and I ended up getting it, and it was a story about, it was basically like me returning back to my hometown of Brownwood, Texas, where both sides of my family were from, and I was going to spend a month there photographing all these people because my mom and my dad both went to high school there, and they went to school, and everyone in this little town knew who I was, but I didn't know who they were. So I went back to Brownwood, Texas, and spent a month. I lived with my mom, and I put my assistants up in hotels. And I think this period was the first time in my life where I got a big chunk of money to create something on my own work. And I feel like I created a body of work that I'm very proud of. Thank you, Kelly. I shot the football teams. I shot the beauty pageants. I shot the women's basketball league at Howard Payne. This is a very small Republican redneck, should I say that, Christian school and university. Tucker Carlson went to school here at Howard Payne. So I shot the little leagues. I shot everything and anything. The veterans. I shot the junior rodeos. I shot the woman Emma, who ran the wig store. Walter B., who ran the leather store. Mostly I spent a lot of time at the junior rodeos and the flea markets. But most importantly, I got to spend a month with my grandmother before she passed away. This was her and her Roseville collection. And this was the first time that my grandmother had ever seen me in work mode. I was just her grandson, right? And then suddenly I'm coming to Brownwood and she's meeting my assistants and seeing me work. And I think it was new for her, right? I consider this period of time between 2008 and 2013 to be my most creative time since I started taking pictures. And it took, I feel like it took 10 years of shooting before I felt comfortable with the work that I was creating. I got to spend an afternoon with Jill Biden at the Vice President's house. Amazing woman. And I started taking pictures again. You might recognize Richard. T.M. Davey, I think T.M. teaches at SVA too. Nicole Eiselman, Angela DeFresney, Miguel again, Mike Elbow. And here I started working for People. And the white seamless thing carried over to People magazine. Does that an issue? And I was shooting the Heroes page for People magazine for a good year and a half. And this was a difficult job, and you had to go get there early. You had to get a giant seamless. You had to rent the equipment. You had to have 2 assistants. It was a production just to get this one shot. They don't do this anymore. So in 2012, my mother got very sick, and I was under a lot of financial stress because I had decided I was going to buy a house, which was really not a smart idea. But I sold the house, paid off my debts, and started over. And in 2014, I put my name out there to try to get work, and I got offered a job at a full-time fashion house. And I have to tell you that that was my first time entering in as a feral cat into a corporate environment. I only lasted 3 months. I don't think I'll ever do it again. But I learned a lot, and I gained a lot of experience, and I created some really solid working work. But my friends were like, how did you get that job? You're not a fashion photographer. And I was like, I got the job because I wasn't a fashion photographer. I was a photographer who could do fashion, toaster ovens, watches, like shoes, purses. I had everything under the sun. And I think that's why they hired me. So from 2014 and 2017, when I lost that job, I basically had a really dark time. I call it like a period where I had a spiritual breakdown, nervous breakdown. I never wanted to work in photography again. I had a really good friend that offered me a position to come work for him in a design studio, and I took it. But this allowed me to start putting myself out in other places that I hadn't ever done. And I started working for nonprofits, working for Queer Art Mentorship, Elastic City, Covenant House. And I started trying new things like still photography, doing whatever I could to try new things and see what stuck. About this time, Paper Magazine called me and asked me to photograph this person, Kim Gordon, at her house in Northampton. And for those that don't know who she is, she was kind of a rock goddess of a band called Sonic Youth. She was a bassist, an artist, singer. She's all of the above. She is an art student also from art school. And you know, when they called me and asked me if I would photograph her, I was stunned and excited. I'll get back to that. So 2014, my best friend Miguel got the Whitney Biennial, and I ended up doing the poster for him and the Whitney Biennial. And that led to other work for PS 122 with Dennis Cooper and Ishmael Houston Jones and the production of Them. And then one of my favorite bands of all time reached out, and this was a big band for me in my teens called Book of Love, and they asked me to photograph their anniversary album. And I cried a little bit. I had a gay tear. And I was putting myself all over the place. Like, I didn't care if you paid me. If you called me up and said, like, you want to go do this? I was like, sure, let's do it. And it led me to, like, spending the day with Bridget Everett, or, like, getting to meet Karen Finley, and getting to meet Larry Kramer, and Joe Montello. So, and I was also doing stills, and I was a big fan of Ira Sachs. And I knew somebody that worked for Ira, and I want to express my interest in working for him. And I ended up working for him for a couple of weeks. And that producer that worked with Ira ended up working for a big project for A24, and they brought me in 2017 as a stills photographer on this horror film said It Comes at Night. And I worked on this project for a month up in Woodstock, and that was a grind. Still photography is hard work. It is its own creation, its own thing. But I learned a lot, and they ended up using everything that I did for them in the production and press pieces and social media. So going back to 2017, and I told you my mother got very sick, they gave her a two-year before she was dead. And in 2017, a new medication came out, and suddenly she was cured of Hep C. And she got Hep C because of me during the birth of me in a cesarean section. So she had carried this blood disease for 50 years, and she survived and beat the disease. And I ended up pitching the idea to Hep Magazine, and I got to go home and photograph my mom for that. She's a warrior. So 2017 was also when I did a project for queer art. They got some money, they got some funding, they asked me to shoot this, and I got to spend an entire day shooting well-known, amazing queer artists in New York. Abram, John. So this is Dance Noise at the Whitney, and I started putting myself out there. This was for the Flea Theater. This is for Wild Project. This is Clay Woman. She's a performance. Michael is a performance artist, and he basically has this whole gimmick where he pretends to be an alien from 5 million miles away, and he comes back to Earth and tells you what's wrong with the planet, what we're all doing wrong. And then coming out of COVID, Vivian and Kenny reached out and asked me to do the poster and press kit for BAM for their show at BAM, for the Christmas show. And these are the pictures that I love, and I'm so happy I got to do this because I'm shooting my friends. We spend the day together. It was amazing. And I'm very proud of this work. And I'm still working. I'm still doing stuff. This was for Pitchfork, Yaya Bay. This is model actress for Pitchfork. This is for Dixon Place, a play that they did. And this is for a piece at Abram Art Center, and I got to meet Cecilia. And for those who don't know Cecilia, she passed away this past year. She was a legend in creating safe spaces for transgender people and sex workers in New York. So I'm going to jump ahead now. And so I've never really talked about this publicly. So this is a first, and I'm trying to still figure out how to put this together. So what happened is that I turned this picture over, and believe me, this is not how she looked, right? This is a retouched photograph of Kim Gordon that I spent many days with my retoucher trying to get it right. And then on this particular day, Paper Magazine published it. Here's me with Kim looking real happy. Little did I know. So the next day, one of the biggest appropriation artists in the world, Richard Prince, for those that don't know who that is, he's made a career out of stealing other people's work, and he's done it since the 80s. And suddenly he's decided to take my work. And I was really upset. I was very upset. I was cursing, calling up Mickey and everyone at Paper, and they were like, oh, sorry. And in any case, I was told by all my friends not to pursue it and to let it go, because there's no way I'm going to win against Richard Prince. Because every time someone tries to sue Richard Prince, he buys them off, they seal their lips, they shut the book, and they go away. And I had this little burning inside of me that was like, this is not going to be me. And then a couple of months later, Kim Gordon did this on her Instagram account. And she didn't mention me, no shout out, no love, just a knife in the back. And I lost my shit. I was very, very upset. And I started making calls, reaching out. My friends, my closest friends, were telling me to let it go. And I was not going to let this go. And then 2.5 years later, now in a copyright suit, you only have 3 years to file, right? From the time of the infringement.
Richard selling the prints of Kim?
What?
How much were the prints of Kim going for?
I'll get there. Okay. So, so I saw this article that Donald Graham was getting interviewed, and he had managed to have a lawsuit against the same body of work. And they mentioned the lawyers in this article. I literally just Googled him and picked up the phone and called him cold. He thought I was crazy. And I explained to him the situation. He was very patient. He was like, just put it in a document and send it to me. The next day he called me and he was like, okay, this is different. We're not sure how this is going to fit into this suit, but we're going to have a talk with Donald and we'll get back to you. What they came back to me with was they were going to give the case to their students at Columbia University and let the students build out the case. And for 2 years, I did mock trials with the students at Columbia University on my case. And those students dug up, and by the way, I need to say that Donald Graham, I'm forever grateful to him for letting me join into the fold of this case, because this case was originally his, and then suddenly I jumped on board. So not only had they made this print, but he made a book, Bloom & Poe made a book, and it was the opening image in a giant show at Bloom & Poe in Tokyo. The image sold for $100,000, canvas piece, $100,000.
An edition of what?
The edition of one. But we don't know how many, the books, he made lots of books, and we don't know how many prints he actually made, irrelevant. But we know Kim Gordon's got it hanging on her wall. So just to kind of summarize this, like this went on for 8 years, and they put me through hell. And they kept filing motions to make my lawyers work. My lawyers left the firm. I had 4 different lawyers over a period of time. And then suddenly, Andy Warhol case and Lynn Goldsmith case finally hit the Supreme Court. And everyone was telling me nothing's going to happen until Lynn Goldsmith's case is tried. So all of a sudden, the Lynn Goldsmith's case goes to court, and it rules in her favor, and I was like, oh, I got him. Because what's he going to do? I'm going to win this case. The Judge Stein had already written his opinion of the case and ruled in my favor, right? So he could have taken this to trial, but he knew he might lose on a public opinion point of view. But if he did lose and he appealed, they would just look to the Supreme Court ruling and say, oh, well, the Supreme Court just ruled this, so we're just going to dismiss this. So he was kind of under a rock, personally. That's what I think. There are other things at play here, of course, because we know litigation is very complicated and there's many things happening. But everything happened in a 2-week period. And when it happened, I chose to go and skip a trial and go with the judgment against him because I know no one had ever had that against him. And I was happy to be the first one to do it. And what that judgment said was, we rule in favor of the plaintiff against the defendants for the claims asserted against them in the fourth of the complaint. In the complaint, it's copyright infringement. So here, he doesn't have to actually sign his name to something that says copyright infringement. He could just says the complaint. And here, he's saying he's forbidden from modifying, preparing derivative works, or selling or touching any of my work ever again. And the best part about this is I can be here today and talk about this. Because if I had accepted all the money and the bribes that he had given me, I would have walked away and never been able to talk about this. And I would have never set a precedent for the next person to build a copyright claim against. Because New York City law builds on precedent. So I put these two in here. They're really good articles. And I take pride in the fact that I created a space for the next person to come along. And I created a nick, and somebody has to go in there and chisel it. So 2004, I'm still here. I'm still working. Now I try to find work and life balance. I'm teaching, and I love it. It's the journey, the endurance, and the longevity that matters, not the success and your fame. And building bridges with people is what keeps you going in the long run. Thank you.
Hi, I very much enjoy your talk. I learned a lot from you, and I think that how you started with photography, I find some similarity with that as well. With that, like I I did try to draw like some famous photograph when I was back in Vietnam. I just really enjoy looking at beautiful photo and learn like doing all the shadow stuff like that. Yeah, so this is an amazing talk. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. So I'm just really interested in that case, Kim Gordon. I'm a big fan of Kim Gordon as well. So when that happened, I know that I don't know about back then when you do photography for like magazine like that. Did they make you sign like an NDA? Did they make you like there's some, I don't know, there's
a PR release.
Yes.
Yeah. So so the question, did Kim Gordon and the team make me sign? So that is a really good question. And normally they would. Normally I would be presented, especially with a celebrity as big as Kim, some type of PR press release that never let me use this image other than the intended image. And if I was going to license it through, Getty or whatever, whoever's doing the syndication with Contour, that I would have to get permission first to do that, right? And I signed a lot of that, but they didn't give me that. And nothing was ever presented to me. And I even reached out to them about it, and I got no response. So, the laws that protect me as a photographer and protect you as photographers are the same laws that protect paparazzi photographers, right? if that person is a celebrity, if their face is recognized, if they use their face to license and sell and market their own product and their own person, then technically it's fair game, right? I do this a lot of times, reach out to people as a courtesy, right? Just to be kind, especially if it's Kim Gordon, like, are you, but I didn't get that. And then when this happened, I was like, that was a mistake.
So sorry, there's just a following
Yep.
question. So how did that person, Richard Prince, got permission to reuse, kind of like reproduce the photograph that belonged to Paper Magazine? It was an opportunity.
How did they get permission? How did they get permission? How did Paper get permission to use it again?
Yeah, like sorry.
How did Richard Prince get permission?
Yeah, how did Richard Prince got permission to?
He didn't.
No, he didn't.
No one ever reached out. He just, this just happened. He took the picture and made this work without ever asking me or paying me anything or giving me any credit. That's part of it. Is like he just treated me like disposable.
I feel like there's an opportunity for Paper Magazine to go after him as well, because the photo technically was.
Let's think about that for a second. Like, politically, that's not going to work good for them, right? Because they're going to be going after two people that they're wanting to be in their magazine. So it's not. They're going to do hands off, right? In fact, most of the legal paperwork that I supplied for this case came from me because I keep records of everything. And when I had to go, during the discovery, they made me pull out 20 years of contracts and invoices. Every job I had ever had, every contract I had ever signed, it took me almost 4 months to pull out all that stuff. But it really showed the arc of my life, and I was like, oh. But yeah, no, they didn't ask for any permission or anything.
It's your last slide. Okay, any more questions? Yeah.
I'm chewing gum, I'm sorry. I don't want to be on the mic with gum in my mouth.
Well, put it somewhere so we can't hear it. Or do you want me to take it for you?
Nah. My fault. How you doing?
Good.
Beautiful talk. You almost brought me to tears.
Oh,
I want to ask about the book. I've never thought to do something like this. You said you got it from a class in college? The idea was from
so remember I showed you, like, in my photo 1 class, we were taught to make a journal. So I started taking Polaroid, because we took Polaroids of everything, right? So I have Polaroids of basically every job I ever did. And I would take 1 or 2 and stick it in here and sometimes write down the thing. And I have 3 or 4 of these books, and they're starting to fall apart. But it's been great because I can be like, I think I shot that person. And I can go back in here and find it or find the date. Sometimes I wrote all the information down. But that's what this was. This was just meant for me to, like, keep track of everything. I didn't realize that I was keeping track of my life, right? Until years later.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Eric. Thank you for the amazing talk. My main question, you talked about changing styles a little bit as you go through your career.
Yeah.
How much was ever that like a concern to you, about getting clients or things like that? If you're changing your lighting, your toning or things like that, how much was that an influence?
A lot. It was a big issue, and I would get that criticism a lot. And from when they would go into editors, they would be like, "I don't really see where your style is," right? And I think it was because I had learned to do so much that I hadn't really. It took me a long time to finesse it, right? So I was just jumping around for a long time. I was. I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily to do that, because I feel like sometimes the picture happens outside of yourself with a mistake, right? And if you're walking into a situation, especially a celebrity portraiture, you need to be able to see and envision that image and that person in that space in different ways. and that not just the way you see it, right? So, but it was a problem. I had a rep tell me once that my work was dark like Darth Vader. I was like, thanks, I'll take that.
Reps will say anything.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, do you feel like the change in styles helped with like burnout and things like that? Because you're not just repeating the same thing over and over again?
Maybe, yeah, maybe that's true. Maybe I was like being like, oh, let's do something different here so I know that I can still do it. Yeah, probably. That's probably right.
Hey, Eric. That was a really fantastic speech, first of all, presentation. I'm going to ask a question for the students back here that I teach, right?
Yeah.
And I get asked this a lot.
It's great to meet you, by the way.
You have celebrities, musicians, right? I also have had the fortune of having to shoot them at times. People always think there's this magic that has to happen in order to shoot them, but they're just regular people. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, good question. So I think that I'm going to go back to Peter Hujar. But when I first started looking at his work, the thing that stuck out the most to me is that he treated everyone on this equal plane. Like didn't matter if you were a superstar or you're a heroin addict living next door, he photographed you on the same level. And I think I still approach that, right? I think I went into shooting those people, I never believed in the magic. I never believed in the magic. I always knew that it was about me getting the shot at all costs.
Would you say it's fair to say that when you do have issues, when you're shooting high-profile celebrities, that it's usually not the person themselves, but the people around them?
That happens a lot. And that's more of that tap dancing that you have to do to learn how to get everyone happy and to get the shot that makes this person and that person and the celebrity. On rare occasions, though, the celebrity will be like, that's all stupid. I want to do that. Like, you know, because that happens too. But yeah, it really depends. Like, there's also been times when I've done celebrity and music work when the shot that I thought was going to be horrible, the last shot, it was like, I'll just do this just in case, right? And then oh, that's the shot. Like, it's hard to tell sometimes. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard when you have a lot of PR people in the room.
Questions? Someone here? Yes, I'll come back down to you guys in the front.
Hello, I really enjoy your portraiture.
Thank you.
I just wish that what you present, all the bad layout that you show, I thought that was quite.
The what?
That I really like your portraiture. I felt the layout, some of the layout just do no justice for your work, right?
I can't hear that last part.
He said that some of the layouts don't do any justice to your work.
Oh.
Like in the magazine.
Yeah.
Oh.
I just trying to give you a compliment first before I ask the real question, right? So,
You don't even know. Like, you turn over this work and you just pray that they don't destroy it.
I'm just a follow-up question, like the other guy asking about style.
Yeah.
About style. Is there a style that you would like today? Like you just want to pick a style to shoot? Is there a style that you will pick?
I think my generation and my style and the time that I was photographing is defined by the strobe and the work of the strobe. And now that we have a whole nother level of technology where we can change the ISO to 100,000 and we can change and manipulate color in real time, I'd really like to experiment with continuous light sources. When I was doing and in school, continuing light sources mean you were going to burn up somebody on set, right? So this is a different, and I've never attempted to really go that. And my style is very distinctly a particular time because it was strobes and soft lights. And I see it coming back now a lot, right? But I think if I were to do it again, I would try to experiment with those types of continuing color and playing with continuous light. Is that what the?
Yes, I
Okay.
just want to see what's the passion.
Okay.
A really wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Especially the court
Thank
the
you so
court
much.
stuff. I mean, that was phenomenal. But I was just wondering, I love the shot of you with all those original prints in boxes, probably. But I was wondering, when did you transfer over to digital from film?
Great question.
Because that would totally affect your style. And the
Yeah.
series that you shot back home,
What?
the images that you produced back home of the town, I love those. I think those were absolutely my favorite out of everything
Oh, thank you.
because of the originality. There's some
And it was film.
sincerity that was coming across, and that was film.
Yeah. So the digital jump happened in 2007 for me, because I was shooting all film, and I was shooting for New York Magazine, and they called and said, so we're not accepting film anymore. We're only accepting digital work. And me and my posse were like, what? Like, do you remember that? Like, we were like, we had to go buy a 5D. We didn't even know what a raw file was. We were just kind of making stuff up. It was hard, and we had to teach ourselves. But I basically shot all that on the street pole stuff, learning how to work a digital camera, a 5D. I did not know. And luckily, I had an assistant who had come out of MIT, or RIT, and knew how to do it. So I was just watching him a lot of times doing it. But it was a hard transition. It definitely was. And it did affect my style and my look. And I think my work suffered a lot for a while. Yep.
It takes a while. He basically asked the same question I was going to ask, which was first to say, thank you for sticking up for photographers and going through all that hell, because that must have been kind of a drag. And also that this work you did when you were at home was, to me, the most moving work. And I think probably the most moving, some of the portraits that followed that you showed us as well. I know you said that you don't believe in the magic, but sometimes I think that there is actually a magic that happens between the photographer and the subject. And when you're both working at it, you get some really interesting pictures.
I will agree with you, and I was being just with the comment about the magic, but I think being back in that small town where everything slowed down and I had time to focus and concentrate and think about the work and take interesting pictures, and no one was telling me what to do or how to do it. And I did have assistants that were out there holding a giant, running around. But I think there probably was a sense of passion in being home that comes out in that work.
So my question is, do you have anything like that now? Sorry.
I keep telling myself that I'm going to go out and do a project like that again. And now that I actually have a little bit of finances, I can maybe do that.
Well, I hope you do, because that work was really strong.
Thank you.
And I hope you also get a chance to play with things like color and light, because the technology is always, I come from like black and white darkroom days.
Yeah.
And photography now is a completely different game than it was in those days. What's kept me going all these years is being able to like learn new things and come up with new ways of like approaching the thing. And also being very, very personal about it. And I hope that works for you as well.
I cannot be personal about it. Like, people would be like, don't take it personally, it's only work. And I'd be like, you mean it's only work because it's personal? Like, I don't, like, how do you separate the two? I've always had a hard time with that.
Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. I have one thing to show, like, do you know the work of Chris Johnson, that black and white photograph? So I have to tell you that Chris Johnson, the reason why he was so incredible is because he is actually one of the Ansel Adams 7. And it was like him, and he was a student of the last group of Ansel Adams students. And he would tell stories of Ansel Adams, black and white printing and stuff. And I'd just be like, whoa. you know, to hear it from the master. Yeah.
Hi. Hello. Okay. So thank you so much, first of all, for sharing your beautiful journey. My question to you would be, like, maybe back in the day when you started out as a photographer, what were your methods to reaching out for opportunities? Like, how would you? Can you?
To Julie.
Yeah. So the question is, how did you reach out to people when you were first starting? Like, how did you?
For magazine, for work. To be honest, I worked as an assistant for so long that I had built connections. And when that first job came because Dana reached out to a photo editor on my behalf, right? So my first jobs were because somebody made an introduction. I was very lucky. But that doesn't mean that I didn't spend another 5 years after that making cold calls and sending emails and trying to get in the door of places. That never ends. That game, that hustle never ends in New York. It still goes on.
Thank you. Any more questions? Comments? No? All right. Thank you so much, Eric.
Thank you.